Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. Sabbath School Boot Camp is here to help you think critically and creatively about your Sabbath School lesson. This is week 5, and we're talking about Jesus as the master teacher. Wait, now that we're talking about Jesus as the master teacher, this is the last lesson, right? I mean, like, what else could we possibly talk about after this? Oh, the next lesson is about Jesus as our master teacher too. Cool, this is going to be a long quarter.
Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. Our mission is to help you think creatively and critically about your Sabbath School lesson. So let's get in the bunker and get going.
We talk about what Jesus came into the world to do, but think about what Jesus didn't come into the world to do. Put an end to oppressive empires, make sure no one on the planet goes hungry, bring peace to the land of Israel, cure cancer, any of these other things. Jesus never did any of them. All of these prophets and sacrifices and scriptures pointed the way toward this God with us, and this God with us was basically anonymous for 91% of his life here. I did the math, okay? And even for the 3 years that he went around teaching and healing, he didn't really say much about these other things, if anything. I mean, told a lot of stories about a future kingdom, told people to be kind to each other, he called people to follow him. But when you step back and think about it, what did God on earth actually accomplish during those 3 years of teaching and healing? I mean, sure, he taught us through his life, the record of which enables us by the power of his Spirit to be like him. And apparently 3 years was all that he needed to teach us everything we needed to know. And apparently 3 years is all human beings would tolerate spending time with God in their sinful condition. Now, I was really excited about this lesson. I think there is a lot to look into in terms of how Jesus taught people and what he wanted them to learn. Unfortunately, this week the lesson flies high above all of that. We only go to the Gospels on Monday and Thursday, which seems kind of strange to me, given that we're talking about Jesus and how he taught people. But if you want to put in some extra work this week to really make your class fantastic, you might get off the beaten path and talk about, I don't know, a couple of stories in Jesus' life that highlight his mastery of teaching. Or you might stick a little closer to the lesson and bring up a story from Jesus' life that illustrates the point the lesson is trying to make on that day. And I'll do that as we go through each day. But first, the summary. Jesus is the incarnate image of the Father, and so he is the master teacher, the teacher of teachers. Here are a couple questions to get your class talking. First, what are some ways Jesus taught people? For example, parables. He also sent people out for some field school, on-the-job training. He worked miracles. Those taught people. Sometimes he taught by what he didn't do, like when he refused to get sucked into a useless debate. Second question, what is Jesus teaching you right now in life? Third, if we are called to teach others, how can we learn from Jesus? How can Jesus teach us teachers? Not just in terms of what we should teach, the subject matter, but how we should teach it. I mean, if you're a Sabbath school teacher, you might share a teaching technique you learned from Jesus to help you be a better Sabbath school teacher. The goal with this is to encourage us not to just look in the Bible for doctrine or promises, but for techniques and strategies. Our teachers in the church need continual improvement. And when you're teaching Sabbath school, it's not just about downloading information from your brain to the class, but to become a better teacher over time. So how can we learn to be better teachers from Jesus? On Sunday, the main idea is that Jesus has come to make known his Father. The book of Hebrews begins with the claim that God has spoken through Jesus in these last days. And this Jesus is no imperfect human vessel of God's will. This Jesus, as the NLT puts it, expresses the very character of God. And the lesson then points us to 2 Corinthians 4, where we find a similar phrase, that Jesus is the exact likeness of God. This makes Jesus better than any prior revelation, because the voice of God coming from the mouth of the prophet is still the voice of God coming through an imperfect vessel. Finally, we are drinking the water at its source in Jesus. Now, the implication, of course, is that we were in desperate need of drinking the water from its source. That all prior revelation, because it came through human beings, was somehow less than good enough. The law was good, but it wasn't good enough. The prophets were good, but they weren't good enough. The advent of Jesus scratches that itch, the itch to really and truly encounter God and be restored to him. Not just through the smoke on the mountain, but through the hand on your shoulder. It turns out that everything that came before was like the teaching assistant, that graduate student who teaches a few undergraduate classes. But now, finally, the teacher himself has come. Now, because Sunday and Monday are parts 1 and 2 of how Jesus revealed the Father, I'm going to wait until the end of Monday before giving you a gospel story that illustrates this, which means we need to move on over to Monday. We are in John 1 on Monday. Here, John says that in Jesus there was life, and that life was the light of mankind. And John the Baptist then came to testify to that light. And the lesson asks, what is the result of Christ becoming a human being? Answer, that light has entered the darkness. The lesson asks, what qualifications does Jesus possess? Answer, he is the light because of verse 18, the only one himself, God, who is in closest fellowship with the Father, has made God known. What I love is John's focus on the life of Jesus as the light. John the Baptist is testifying about Jesus' life. The light that Jesus shines in the darkness is his very life. Jesus himself says in John 10:10, I come that they might have life and have it to the full. In other words, what did Jesus come to teach us? He came to teach us how to have his kind of life. And much of his teaching was just in living his life, letting us see what his kind of life looks like when compared to our kinds of lives. We don't need a textbook. So the purpose of doctrines and all this teaching is ultimately to lead us toward the divine quality of life that Jesus had. In John 14, Philip asks Jesus to show us the Father. And this question, however well meant, is nonsense. Because if you have seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. There is only one kind of life, one character, one God. There is no qualitative difference between the members of the Godhead. Now, I agree with the lesson. We shouldn't be hard on Philip here, okay? He didn't understand. That's okay. We don't understand either most of the time. Because sometimes these kinds of questions make for the best teaching moments. And I think the lesson puts it perfectly when it says that Philip's statement is probably recorded not to give us reason to criticize him, but to give us opportunity to examine ourselves. Philip was probably hoping for a sign. Maybe Jesus would part the clouds and give the disciples a glimpse into heaven. Isaiah had had such a vision, Daniel too, but not many had. And here was Jesus, and if anyone could show them one of these cool magic tricks, then it was Jesus. It wasn't that Philip asked a dumb question. It was just the wrong question. He wanted to see the Father with his eyes, but Jesus wasn't in the world to give folks a keyhole look at the Father. Jesus was the image of the Father, living, breathing, walking among us. So when we look at the life of Jesus, his teaching is not just the stories he used or the very obviously religious content of some of his statements. Everything about Jesus' life is a teaching. It is the light. The way he looked at people, the way he listened to people, where he went, how he used his time, everything about Jesus is worthy of our study because he didn't come to reveal merely the right ideas about the Father, but he came to demonstrate the Father's kind of life, the life that heals other people, the life that speaks truth and hope to people, the life that loves, the life that sacrifices, the life that gives attention and purpose and life to others rather than draining others, okay? So after Philip asked Jesus to show them the Father, Jesus told them the Father residing in me performs his miraculous deeds. Therefore, every miracle Jesus ever worked was really a revelation of the Father. So you can pick up any story in the Gospels, talk about how they reveal the Father. How did Jesus reveal the Father when he was feeding the 5,000? Isn't feeding his children something a father does? He showed us his willingness to care for our needs. Or take the story of Jesus sleeping through the storm. There, the Creator calmed his restless creation, bringing peace to that enmity between nature and human beings. This is what God desires to do in our world. Trucking over to Tuesday, we encounter one of the most beautiful passages in the Bible, Philippians chapter 2. Paul thinks church will work as it ought when everyone in the community of faith shares the incarnational mindset that Jesus had. We must all empty ourselves and take up the servant's towel. It is the only way to find lasting glory. The goal of Christianity is that we might have the mind of Christ in us together. In order to do that, we must know him. We must know what he teaches. But the end goal is not just to know the words that he used, okay? Growing up, I heard about various Christians who had memorized the Bible, and that's incredible, okay? But that's not really the goal. That doesn't mean you're somehow closer to God than anyone else. What matters is that this information you learn ultimately leads you to adopting the mindset of Jesus, to becoming more like Jesus, to living his kind of life. And of course, we see this mindset all through the life of Jesus. When he's being beaten and betrayed, he responds with respect and gentleness. When Peter draws his sword and aims for Malchus's head and misses, by the way, because he only manages to chop off an ear, Jesus stops being arrested for a moment and heals the man. Everywhere we look, we see this incarnational mindset at work in Jesus. And we are called to have that mindset as well. Waltzing over the Wednesday, we're talking about reconciliation. And the question is raised, how does reconciliation lie at the heart of Christ's incarnation and his role as master teacher? We are stepping deeper into this lesson now, aren't we? Jesus is in the world, reconciling the world to God by showing mercy. And so we are called as his followers to do the same work, sacrificing ourselves and offering people mercy and calling them to be reunited with God. Or to put it another way, Jesus was in the world helping to undo the curse of the Tower of Babel, to bring people together, not around the project designed to replace God, but around the path back toward God. Can you think of a more important ministry right now? I mean, given the political state of America. Amen. We are called to be reconcilers, not antagonists, not partisans, not flamers, not trolls. And we know from this passage in 2 Corinthians that there's no true reconciliation around anything other than Christ. When Jesus met the woman at the well in John 4, he showed her how the Father felt toward her and her people. The Jews and the Samaritans were enemies, as you know. The woman brought up a key issue in the debate between those two peoples. Where should we worship? And Jesus doesn't get sucked in. He disarms her by caring about her more than the debate and focusing on the thing that matters. Not where we worship, but how. And it was a prime example of how Jesus was in the world, reconciling it to himself. Trucking over to Thursday, the lesson talks about those shepherds who visited the manger as Jesus' first students. I'm all for a very flexible application of the Bible, but calling Mary and Joseph and the shepherds Jesus' first students is a little bit of a stretch to me. He was an infant. To be sure, the incarnation taught us all, but acting as if this baby in the manger was our master teacher at that moment of his life, maybe overstating it. You can talk about the Father teaching the world something by sending Jesus, maybe at that point, but master teacher baby, I don't know. But I do like this point in the lesson. Before he has spoken his first parable or performed his first miracle, the master teacher is worthy of our worship because of who he is. And I love that thought. Jesus doesn't have to earn our worship. He doesn't have to die for us to worship him. He was already worthy of our worship. And what we see in the birth narrative are these people, these shepherds and wise men and a priest and a prophet, recognizing Jesus for who he was, the image of God among us. And the question at the bottom of the page is good for us to consider. What does the incarnation teach us about God? Man, we could spend forever on that question, can't we? It teaches us that God cares, that God wants to know us and isn't ashamed to be seen among us. It teaches us that the gulf between God and humanity isn't insurmountable. It can be bridged. And that is beautiful stuff. And unfortunately, it's all we have time for this week. So class dismissed. We'll see you next week.